I'm delighted to welcome Saskia Schellekens, a Senior Advisor at the United Nations Populations Fund, to our new dialogue series. Religions for Peace is initiating these dialogues with various multilateral institutions to learn and to provide insight for our global multi-religious movement on the work of your organization. To start with, I would like to ask you and invite you to share with us a little bit about yourself, about your current position at UNFPA, and the work you and your office are pursuing. Please.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very nice introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Saskia Schellekens, and I am the Senior Advisor on Culture at the UN Population Fund, UNFPA. First of all, I would like to say, as UNFPA, but also in the context of the UN system more broadly and the work that we do in the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development, we greatly welcome this kind of opportunities to engage with interfaith and multi-faith initiatives like Religions for Peace, which has been a long-standing partner for many of us in the UN and also especially in UNFPA. And I stepped into this role, as you may know, relatively recently, following in the footsteps of Secretary General of the Religions for Peace now, Dr. Asa Karam, who's left a tremendous legacy on the work with religions and with faith-based organizations and religious leaders in UNFPA, but also, again, for the UN system at large, I would say. And it's an enormous privilege to take over this role and also a tremendous challenge in a way, stepping into these very large shoes, obviously, and building on the legacy that Dr. Asa left. Really as a pioneer, I think, in this field for the UN and for UNFPA, initially to look into our work and how we leverage our collaboration with faith-based organizations and religious institutions. Maybe just to say a little bit about myself, I've taken on this role relatively recently, as said, but at the same time, I've been with UNFPA since 2003 and have a long-standing career with the fund itself in many different capacities. Primarily worked on adolescent and youth issues, broader ICPD coordination, the coordination on UNFPA's mandate, the International Conference on Population and Development's Program of Action, and also other areas of work. And most recently, I was seconded as the special advisor to the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth at the UN Secretariat for the past 5.5 years before my recent return, where I led very much on the establishment of the Office of the Youth Envoy and on strengthening youth policies and youth programs throughout the UN system's work in support of the then still very new function of the UN Youth Envoy. And then I said, I just earlier this year, a few months ago, started stepping into this role as Senior Advisor on Culture. My main responsibility will be leading on the policy direction setting of the UNFPA's work with partners in ensuring that we engage closely with relevant partners, particularly with faith-based organizations and religious institutions in advancing the implementation of the ICPD program of action, but also looking at the role that UNFPA plays in convening and coordinating the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development, which UNFPA has been leading under ASA's leadership over the past decade, and which we will continue to co-convene now in a different arrangement, but we will continue to play a key role in bringing the UN system at large also together on issues of religion and sustainable development.
You already mentioned the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development. Maybe we can go a little bit more deeper into the work of this Interagency Task Force. And you already mentioned the connection to faith-based civil society actors or religious actors, and how this I would like to know how your work is specifically connected to working with these, with faith-based communities and civil society actors, or religious communities, and why do you, for example, also perceive it as important to partner with them?
Yeah. So the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development was established in 2010, initially brought together by 8 of the UN principals from different UN agencies, funds and programs, along with the then World Bank president, who, at the behest of whom this Interagency Task Force was established as a platform for UN entities and the World Bank to discuss our areas of work with religious institutions, faith-based organizations, and how religion intersects with the mandates of our different organizations, and really share information and knowledge, but also incrementally has taken on the role of capacity building of our own staff, but also in working with faith organizations. As well as more recently also the actual establishment of a multi-faith advisory council to the UN and to the UN system that advises on our work as a UN system with faith-based organizations and partners. So that's very much in a nutshell. The Interagency Task Force has expanded over time and now counts 25 UN entities as its members, and it's co-convened by at the moment 2 co-chairs, which are the UN Alliance for Civilizations and the Office of the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, who together with UNFPA convene this task team, where at this moment UNFPA is taking on the coordination of the Executive Secretariat of the task force. So, and these roles are to be rotating amongst the 3 entities over the coming 3 years. But up till recently, the task force was led by UNFPA as the co-chair, but I think that this expansion of our coordination with other UN entities also really is an indication, in a sense, of the growing interest within the UN system in working with faith-based organizations and partners, and really that recognition that faith actors are actually very key to delivering on the work that we as different UN entities and system partners are to lead on. So I take it as a very positive development, and beyond the development that we have seen the growth in terms of the numbers of members of the task force. As one of the very concrete things, what the task force has done is the establishment of a multi-faith advisory council, to which Religions for Peace is also a key member of that group. It consists of 40 representatives at the highest level of different religious and faith-based organizations from all different denominations and religions, but also reflecting different regions and parts of the world, that come together to advise the UN on its various areas of work, and have now been formalized into a group that has for its work plan for the coming 2 years identified a number of key issues, which are, I think, very consistent also with the UN's own UN Sustainable Development Agenda and the 2030 Agenda that I'm sure you are well familiar with. And those themes are very much around gender equality and women and girls empowerment, environment and climate change, inequalities, and peace and security. So those are the thematic areas that we particularly convene around with the Multi-Faith Advisory Council, but also with other partners. And I think you really see that also in the number of initiatives and programs that take place, capacity building events or workshops, different advocacy-focused events that we organize around key intergovernmental processes to really highlight the importance of that partnership and working on these particular key global development issues with faith-based partners. So that may be set on the side of the Interagency task force and the collaboration with the Multi-Faith Advisory Council and faith actors more generally. But maybe coming now also back to UNFPA. As you may know, UNFPA is the UN entity that seeks to ensure that every pregnancy is wanted, that every birth and delivery is safe, and that every young person can achieve its full potential. And in doing so, we have a strategic plan in support of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was launched in 2018, which really focuses on 3 transformative results. And those are very much around ensuring that all preventable maternal death ends, that there's 0 also unmet need for family planning, and that we see 0 gender-based violence or harmful practices, such as, for instance, child marriage or female genital mutilation. So very much around and in support of, if you will, SDG 3 on health and Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender. So that's very much sort of the core focus of UNFPA, and as you I think see, it relates to the most sensitive, perhaps, and the most private and intimate parts of spheres of life or human existence. So it's a sometimes challenging agenda because many countries continue to have taboos sometimes around these issues of sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. So we have learned very much as UNFPA over the years that it's actually really critical for us to, in order to advance this sensitive agenda, to work very closely with partners on the ground and with partners that have actually that reach to people in their day-to-day lives. And faith-based organizations, religious institutions and leaders have been identified as very key for that, obviously, given that they speak to the hearts and the minds of so many hundreds of millions of people around the world. So for many years we have been establishing partnerships and nurturing partnerships with civil society actors generally, but within that's also very specifically with a focus on faith-based organizations. And those partnerships, I think, span a wide variety of areas of engagement. It can be more at the global level, global advocacy, etc., on joint initiatives, but it can also very much relate to the work that we do as an implementing organization that has an operational arm on the ground with faith-based actors on the ground that are very much also oftentimes at the forefront of the service delivery, of health service delivery, education, etc. So there's a long-standing awareness of the importance of that partnership, and it's something that also under Dr. Aza's leadership, she has, of course, led on and invested in very much, and that's become really part and parcel of the UNFPA approach, which falls under a broader heading of culturally sensitive approaches to our work.
Thank you so much. From what you just shared about the work of UNFPA and your work as well on the UN Interagency Task Force, I would like to draw a connection also to the current situation that we are living in. We're currently living in a time of a global pandemic, and it has become clear already that not a single sector has been left unaffected by the spread of this new virus. And I would like to ask you to share with us your insights on how the pandemic also affected your work, and secondly also why maybe you perceive it as important, especially in a time of a crisis like the COVID-19 crisis, to partner with faith-based civil society actors, and what might be a value or benefit to partner with faith-based actors.
Yeah. No, I think what we have seen with the global COVID-19 pandemic, obviously it's a crisis unlike any we have ever seen before, and it's critical that we mobilize all partners in the international community in its response to COVID-19. But I do think that we have seen a particular recognition and also engagement from faith-based organizations and partners, and that recognition has very much again to do with what I said before, the fact that faith-based organizations and religious leaders have that opportunity to reach communities and people on the ground, and really on the one hand are often seen by people on the ground as a credible and a trusted voice, that sometimes governments, there's levels of mistrust, or there's challenges in really communicating to the level of communities and individual households, where we of course see that for faith-based organizations and religious institutions, they have that natural connect with the community at that level. So that's one thing. Obviously, I think for many people in this time of crisis and need, they're looking for answers also, and in that sense also looking for a sense of seeing their spiritual needs fulfilled as well. And I think in that regard, obviously they turn to their religious institutions and religious leaders to provide that level of comfort and support. And in that engagement, there are also opportunities for other levels of engagement on other issues, where I think as the UN, we have seen also particularly faith-based organizations and religious leaders as critical channels for ensuring that that evidence-based information reaches people on the ground. So I think those are very critical elements to the COVID response. What I'm very happy about is that we have, I think, seen a strong recognition of that fact as UNFPA, and we will definitely and are leveraging our own networks with civil society, and within that very much also the faith-based and religious networks that we have nurtured over the many years, as I mentioned. But also I think from the UN system at large, as the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development, we brought together all the 25 members to agree on a joint statement that was put out pretty early on in the unfolding of the pandemic. That also obviously built very much on already starting and developing initiatives that we saw from different UN entities that individually worked very closely with our faith-based partners, but obviously also seen that the Secretary General, I think, has been extremely I don't know how to say it, but the Secretary General has also expressed his recognition for the role of religious leaders in the context of COVID more strongly than we've ever seen him, I think, express the importance of these particular actors. Most recently in the high-level event that Morocco convened last week on the role of religious leaders and the COVID-19 response, but even before that, in various statements and engagements that the Secretary General undertook, which has been very encouraging, I think, for many of us who've worked in this space for a while, or even for newcomers like me, where we have not seen that recognition as strong as yet. So I think that's the good thing. At the same time, I think there's still a lot of space to see of how that then actually gets implemented. How do we operationalize it? We now have the UN Sustainable Development Group's guiding framework that was put out for our country level operations on the ground, led by the resident coordinators, with the entire UN country teams aligning behind those. And in that framework, the role of faith-based organizations and religious leaders is again also specifically recognized, especially as it comes to the role that we see needs to be played in ensuring social cohesion, social protection, and community resilience. So in that regard, where the guidance was I think circulated like 2 weeks ago now, but I think we will now start to see how it's actually translated into implementation on the ground, and what can we learn from that and draw from that, and hoping that in a little time we will also have some lessons learned in that space and be able to share those as well.
Thank you so much. You just mentioned a few of the positive developments, but also challenges that come along with your work. And also the next question is kind of connected to that also, maybe also a little bit more personal. And I would like to ask you, what do you find most inspiring, but also sometimes maybe frustrating to work with faith-based civil society actors or religious communities? Because I think to learn from each other and to improve partnership, it's important also to touch upon this.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a tricky question, of course. I think one of the most inspiring things for me, as still very new to the work with faith-based organizations so far, and having worked quite extensively with other civil society partners throughout my career, I think the distinction for me has very much been that I am impressed by the level of compassion and real sense of service to the community that I have seen from faith-based actors that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with so far. And I think that for me has been sort of eye-opening. At the same time, I think, of course, as the UN and even the UN Charter, the first three words are "we the peoples," and this, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is all about leave no one behind. So as UN system, as UN organizations, and also as UNFPA with our very particular mandate that is all around ensuring human dignity and human rights, I think, of course, we are also there, and that's where I see a commonality to serve people in their communities, in their daily lives. But I think as UN entities, of course, we are working at a global level through governments, and there's always the intergovernmental politics that come into that, and the whole political dimension that sometimes it may feel as if we are somewhat removed from that actual delivering for the people and working with the people, etc. And I do appreciate that comes in very much through the work with the faith-based organizations, and that we have that in common, and that I think I feel a very strong interlinkage in that regard. I think it's the most inspiring what I've seen in my very short time of engaging with faith-based actors so far is, I think it's the best. What I get to see is when I see in different faith-based organizations come together around specific issues, where you see really that there is a lot of agreement around the issues and how to approach them, and that the importance of working together and advancing certain values and issues together is seen as important in itself. The interfaith collaboration, the multi-faith, it's not just the respect to each other, but really the understanding of, and that I think is very much exemplified in Religions for Peace itself. But I think, in my view, that's also where the strength of our engagement as a UN with that space lies, where we really see where we have our commonalities as UN with faith-based actors, but also where you see your commonalities as different faith inspired and faith-based organizations representing different faiths and religions. So that's more on the inspiring side, I would say. On the challenging side, obviously, I think it's no surprise to anyone that working on particularly on the issues of sexual reproductive health, reproductive rights, gender-based violence, there tends to also sometimes be an overuse of religious references of actually undermining the advancement of these particular values and issues, which obviously is probably just the minority, but it's still a very big challenge sometimes to find. And I think that's where we draw on the strength of our relations and partnerships with faith-based organizations to actually counter that and to ensure that the discourse and dialogue around these issues continues to be rooted in human rights and the common frameworks that have international agreement around them. But we see that obviously in the intergovernmental space a lot at the UN, and that pushback continues to require a strong pushback. So it's the organizing and ensuring that we continue to have a consolidated response with the key partners around that, and pushing back against the pushback will continue to be very important. And in that, I think there's also space for faith-based organizations to more closely perhaps collaborate sometimes with secular civil society around those issues. But also, I would say from my experience, having worked very closely with youth organizations and youth networks, to try and see if there are opportunities for engaging youth organizations as well, who oftentimes are very, I think, advanced in their thinking on these issues, but don't always get enough space to actually be involved in the actual global level processes around it, where their voices need to be heard, but also that collaboration, I think, could benefit on both sides, that the religious and faith-based organizations could benefit a lot from learning and working with youth organizations and vice versa. So that maybe on that, yeah, I think I can stop here.
To close off, finally, I would like to offer you also the opportunity to say a few words in your own conclusion about your work, or maybe also about the current situation. It may be something that you envision for the post-COVID-19 future, or maybe it's something about the current situation that you criticize, or maybe it's just an advice or something that you would like to share with the Religion for Peace movement. Yes, that's a final question.
Thank you, Sarah. Final few reflections. Maybe I do think, and you have probably heard also the UN Secretary General speak on this as well, that as we are still in the midst of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we also need to start thinking of the socioeconomic recovery, and that we need to build better. And that building better should include a strong focus also on issues like inequality, issues like climate change, and the action needed around that. And I think in that context, we can also draw again a lot on the learnings and teachings from religious organizations and institutions, where I think there's a vast wealth of reflections and think pieces around many of those issues, both within the UN system but also within the faith space, that I think could help in framing and shaping that recovery that is more inclusive and leads us to establish a more fair and just world, and also a more sustainable planet in a sense. And I recently, I forgot in what context it was, but there was someone mentioning the fact that so many religious denominations recognize the day of rest in the week, a day of rest to praise God, but also a day of rest just to reflect. And I think that was seen in connection with climate action, and basically actually also a day where you actually lower your eco footprint as an individual or as a family, etc. And that now we're seeing in this process of lockdown what are the implications also with so many fewer people commuting and the carbon dioxide output being so much lower, that it actually is also a huge benefit to that for the planet in a sense. And it was for me also again something that was quite eye-opening, because I had never really considered it from that perspective. And I think again there are certain things that I think we have maybe digressed from a bit as a humanity, that may have been there all along for the many centuries. But that we've all taken from a certain interpretation and not really seen in the broadest light that we could see this. And so I think there will be many other things that need to be and that could be brought to this conversation also by actually looking at the long established rituals and teachings and learnings from the vast wealth of world religions that is out there.